Just days after the US president called Iran a rogue nation, Tehran says it has successfully tested a new ballistic missile. But what will that mean for the landmark 2015 nuclear agreement? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme today with me, Peter Dobbie. When world powers came together to sign the 2015 nuclear agreement framework with Iran, it was hailed as a historic achievement. It was the first time Iran had agreed to curb its nuclear programme in exchange for the lifting of some sanctions. But 2 years later, and with a distinctly different president in the White House, that agreement faces an uncertain future. President Donald Trump has now threatened to withdraw from that agreement, calling the Islamic Republic a, quote, rogue state. Now Iranian state media have released footage of what they say is the successful launch of a ballistic missile. It was unveiled at a military parade just a few hours before the test. President Hassan Rouhani says Tehran will not seek permission from any country to strengthen its defense capabilities. We'll bring in our guests in just a moment, but first, this report from Sinem Kosulu.
These are Iran's latest ballistic missiles. With a range of 2,000 kilometers, they can reach much of the Middle East, including Israel. During his speech, President Hassan Rouhani defended his country's right to protect itself.
No matter if you like it or not, we will boost our defense and military power to the extent deemed necessary for deterrence. We will not seek permission from anyone to defend our country and our land.
That's likely to cause more anger at the White House. President Donald Trump called Iran a rogue nation during his address at the UN this week and has threatened to withdraw from the 2015 nuclear agreement.
Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me. It is time for the entire world to join us in demanding that Iran's government end its pursuit of death and destruction.
A group of 6 world powers, namely China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, the US, and Germany, are part of the deal, which included the lifting of sanctions for Iran's curbing of its nuclear program. But analysts say the Trump administration isn't likely to back down on the agreement.
For President Trump, I think there are 2 aspects that are problematic about this deal. First is his overall perspective towards the Muslim world, which I would characterize as one with deep antagonism. And the second is basic business sense. This deal doesn't make sense from an American business perspective. It doesn't benefit the United States economically. The core bargain of the Iran nuclear deal is that Iran made a series of concessions on its nuclear program in exchange for the United States essentially lifting sanctions on other countries.
The international powers that brokered the deal are pressing the White House stick by it. The agreement prevents Iran from its nuclear activities for 10 to 15 years. It also allows Tehran to maintain some of its nuclear stockpiles for research and medical purposes, although it's not clear what happens after that or if the United States withdraws from the agreement. Sinem Kosulu, Al Jazeera.
We've heard a lot about the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran. It was signed between Tehran and 6 world powers, the US, the UK, France, China and Russia, plus Germany. They agreed to lift sanctions against Iran in exchange for the government's curbing of its nuclear program. The deal restricts, amongst other things, the amount of nuclear fuel that Iran can keep for the next 15 years. And it prevents its ability to use 2 radioactive materials, uranium and plutonium, to make weapons. To do that, Iran's stockpile of low-enriched uranium had to be reduced by 98%, and 2/3 of its installed centrifuges had to be cut. The deal also calls for sanctions to be imposed quickly if the agreement is violated, and inspectors from the UN's nuclear watchdog get access to Iran's nuclear sites anytime. OK, let's bring in our panel. Joining us here from Stockholm is the former Prime Minister of Sweden and co-chairman of the European Council on Foreign Relations, Carl Bildt. In Tehran, Hanbar Naderi, a journalist with the daily English language newspaper Kayan International, and from Richmond, Virginia, Mark Fitzpatrick, director of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, who previously spent 26 years at the US State Department. Welcome to you all. Carl Bildt, this Iranian missile launch, how dangerous is it?
I don't think that isolated missile launch is particularly dangerous. This is a part of an ongoing Iranian program for quite some time. Iranian defense efforts are not particularly impressive, but they invest in their missile program, they invest in special forces, they don't have money for very much else. But I think also in political terms, it should also be interpreted now as defiance against Trump. I think the Trump rhetoric on leaving whatever he will do, the nuclear agreement has reinforced the consensus in Tehran that one needs to continue this missile program. So in itself, not particularly exciting, but with the politics of it, yes, problematic.
Mark Fitzpatrick in Richmond, we've known for some time that Iran could, in theory, say, hit a target like Israel. It's got the range. So why are tensions increasing today?
Well, I think Minister Bildt put it exactly right, that Iran is responding to President Trump's bellicose statement at the UN, and that this missile is part of a development program that's been in play for some time. Iran's missile development is going on at a much slower pace compared to North Korea's. Just a few missile tests a year compared to over 24 for North Korea. But I think Iran is probably seeking this particular missile because other missiles in its inventory have not proven so effective. Previous missile, the Sajil-2, hasn't been tested successfully for several years, and perhaps Iran was not able to acquire the various materials needed to fuel that missile. So they are now experimenting with this Khorramshahr missile.
Hanbar Naderi in Tehran, why does the Iranian leadership feel the need today to flex those muscles?
This has nothing to do with flexing muscles, and as your distinguished guest just mentioned, it has also nothing to do with Iran in defiance of President Trump's, threats, military threats, or Iran not being able to upgrade and improve its missile defense capabilities. This has everything to do with Iran's right to defend itself under international and UN charter. Make no mistake, Trump has been around for a couple of months, probably 6 months or so, but Iran's missile defense program has been around for more than 27 years. So before Trump and after Trump, this program is going to continue apace for the simple fact that Iran does not get permission from any country or outside power to determine how it is supposed to defend itself. As far as Iran's nuclear missile deterrence capabilities are concerned, I have talked to several military commanders. The tests will continue apace in the coming weeks and months. And by the way, get ready for a new surprise, because Iran will soon send a new satellite into orbit. So we have pretty much advanced our capabilities in this particular field. And at the same time, I would like to repeat what President Rouhani said yesterday. Iran's missile defense capabilities does not pose any threat to its neighbors whatsoever.
Carl Bildt, just to be clear here, we're talking about a missile launch. Missile launches, ballistic missiles, are not covered by the nuclear deal. That's to do very clearly with uranium enrichment.
Well, that has to do with the nuclear program. That is correct. What is prohibited is, of course, that any sort of nuclear missile or nuclear armed missile, that goes without saying. Now, Iran is claiming, which I think is broadly correct, that these are missiles that do not have the intention to deliver nuclear warheads. The US is saying that there is language in the Security Council resolutions that is meant to discourage Iran from these activities. But strictly speaking, there is no international prohibition against Iran having this particular program. As Mark Fitzpatrick said, it's been ongoing for a fairly long time, and I think has its backgrounds in the experience of the Iran-Iraq war, as a matter of fact.
Mark, you wanted to come in there.
Jump in on here? Yes. Let me just provide a little bit more detail about the Security Council Resolution 2231 that does speak to this question. It calls upon Iran not to test missiles that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And this missile system that was just tested is certainly capable of carrying nuclear weapons. It's based on Soviet Scud systems that were developed for nuclear weapons delivery. So there's no question about its nuclear weapons capability or why it was originally developed. And your guest from Tehran had noted that Iran has been developing missiles for 27 years. It's pretty well established that part of that program did have the intention to mate it with nuclear weapons. Now, the nuclear weapons part has been put on hold thanks to the Iran nuclear deal, but the missiles still are in development, and that's why it does present the threat.
Mr. Nadiri, please carry on.
It has nothing to do with threat. Excuse me. What you are trying to say is that Iran's missiles can carry these nuclear warheads. The problem is Iran doesn't have nuclear warheads. If you are in doubt, please be my guest and ask the IAEA and go through all its reports and investigations over the past couple of years. They have made it absolutely clear that Iran has not violated the terms of the nuclear agreement with the world powers and the international community. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program because Iran doesn't need a nuclear weapons program. Iran only needs missile defense capabilities to defend itself within its own borders, for the simple fact that the Trump White House and this madman in Tel Aviv, who is called Benjamin Netanyahu, keeps threatening us with so-called military options. Please be a little bit fair and go through the IAEA reports over the past couple of months or years.
We all understand that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon and that it is prohibited, and it is said it has no intention. But the fact is that it used to have a nuclear weapons program associated with its missile program, and in the future it could resume the nuclear program and have well-developed missiles. That's why it is of concern. That's why there should be some attention.
You are right. You are free to speculate. You are free to speculate, but you are speculating under the assumption that what you hear from the White House and Tel Aviv are right, which is not true. Iran is not going to develop nuclear program today, tomorrow, or ever, because Iran doesn't need nuclear weapons. Where are we supposed to drop these weapons? We don't need them. Why should we have nuclear weapons? We love to have perfect relations with our Arab neighbors in the Persian Gulf. We love to have perfect relations even with Saudi Arabia. But the problem is the Trump White House, the neoconservatives, and the Israeli regime, and the Zionist lobby in Washington don't let that happen. That is the problem.
Gandar Nadiri, I'm going to interrupt you there because you're taking us towards at least two other discussions. Let's take it back to Carl Bildt for a second. Carl Bildt, is there a certain double standard here? Go with me on this one. Is there a certain double standard? We know that Israel has a nuclear capability. We think it's between 80 and 90 nuclear warheads. It's begged, borrowed, or stolen all the kit to go with that. Nobody in Washington is pointing a finger at the government in Jerusalem. And just over the past couple of months, the US has been testing ballistic missiles around the world as well. So, and it's not looking at itself saying we've got to up our game either. So what's really going on here?
No, I mean, it's absolutely true, of course, that Israel is assumed to have a fairly substantial nuclear force. It also have advanced and most probably high-precision medium-range ballistic missiles that can cover most of the region. That's part of the equation. And I believe I belong to those who think that one should work towards a nuclear-free zone in the entire Middle East. Without going too much into the technicality of what is nuclear capable, I mean, a lot of things are nuclear capable. A DC-3 aircraft is nuclear capable, although it's not an ideal carrier. The old Scuds, as Mark alluded to, which is the beginning of this, which goes back to the German V2 during the Second World War. Yeah, but that was nuclear capable, no question about that, in the Soviet arsenal. But it was also used very widely in the Iran-Iraq war from both sides, with conventional weapons, to what effect one can discuss. And I think it's that particular experience from that particular conflict and the use of ballistic missiles for conventional threatening, deterrence, or harassment purposes, or whatever you call, that is one of the backgrounds to what we see from the Iranian side now.
Okay.
Are there double standards?
Just let me interrupt you a second. There are a couple of other big points that I want to get to, Carl Bildt. Gandar Naderi in Tehran. If America pulls out, how will Iran react?
Well, if that is going to happen, Iran won't bother at all, because this is an international agreement with the world powers, and the U.S. is only one party to this important deal. The U.S. is going to isolate itself. End of the discussion. It is not going to hurt the nuclear deal for the simple fact that the whole national community, even Iran's neighbors, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, everybody else also support this important nuclear deal for the simple fact that it is going to help establish peace and security in the region, which is what we all need. So the White House is free to walk out. We don't care, but we are going to have much better relations with the international community and prove to them, even to North Korea, that America cannot be trusted when it comes to international negotiations and at the same time deals. So America is going to isolate itself. We would love to see that. Go ahead and make our day.
Mark Fitzpatrick, if America pulls out, what is that signal saying or sending to North Korea? Because North Korea might then surely turn around and say, well, hang on, you've pulled out of that deal. The deal, one assumes, would stay in place because then it would be 1+5, not 1+6. But then Pyongyang might turn around and say, well, how can we negotiate with you if you back out of your promises and your pledges?
What you've just said is so clear and should be understood by everyone. It's one of the strong arguments why the United States should not pull out of the nuclear deal. It sends a signal not just to the North Koreans, who unfortunately aren't interested, it appears, in negotiating anyway, but it certainly does send exactly the signal that you suggested. It also sends a signal to other countries that the United States does not maintain deals. But I want to just introduce a note of caution here. Whatever the United States decision is in the next couple of weeks about certifying or not that Iran is in compliance with the deal won't necessarily mean that the United States is pulling out of it. I think the United States has several decision points, several cards to play, and I think it will be a little cautious itself about pulling out of the deal. What it might do is impose additional sanctions and hope that Iran pulls out of the deal, and both sides might hope the other side pulls out.
Carl Bildt, you're nodding in acknowledgement there. Is there another potential corollary here? And it's this, that the other European powers who've pushed for this, who have that strategy of distant engagement, they might end up looking a little bit weaker.
Well, I'm not quite certain who will be the weakest here, because, as was pointed out, the deal was essentially negotiated between the United States and Iran. That's true, but it had been sort of facilitated by the European Union and very much supported by Russia and China, and is endorsed unanimously by the UN Security Council. So it is an international agreement. And I agree, I don't think sort of US will leave it sort of openly, but they will try to provoke in different ways so that one way or the other they can claim that Iran is in violation to it. I was slightly encouraged, I would say, by President Rouhani's rather moderate approach to this. When he talked at the UN General Assembly, he was not overly provoked by President Trump. And I think it is very important that the Iranian leadership don't fall into the trap that very obviously the hardliners in the Trump administration is trying to set for them.
So, Mark Fitzpatrick, when Donald Trump says the deal is an embarrassment, it's a good deal, it's a solid deal, everyone's on board, what's he basing that on? What's embarrassing about this accord, this agreement they put together?
Well, okay, I don't agree with what he said, but I can understand some of it is that the deal, there was a hope that the deal would be transformative. Now, it was strictly transactional, it was strictly a nuclear deal, but there was a hope that it would help to change Iran's behavior in the region and at home. And it hasn't had any such effect. Iran's involvement in neighboring countries has increased. Its domestic posture has not changed visibly, and it has seized additional American citizens during the last couple of years, which is of grave concern to all Americans. Plus, incidents in the Gulf of harassment of U.S. ships have increased of late. So there are many reasons why President Trump and others in the United States feel anger at Iran. and wish that this nuclear deal could have been used to help control that, and it wasn't. It hasn't changed Iran's behavior at all.
Carl Bildt, I mean, the economies of the country vastly different, the population is vastly different, but could this deal as it stands, even if it survives a Trump decision to withdraw, could this deal be used as a template for the beginnings of negotiations with North Korea?
I don't think it could be a template for that, but at least if you look at the details, because it's very different situations. I mean, North Korea does have nuclear weapons, does have both plutonium and uranium production capabilities, weapons grade, has a very much more advanced missile program than I think we were aware of until fairly recently. So it's a much more tricky and a much more closed society. Not that Tehran is normally that open, but I mean, a much more closed society in North Korean case. So I don't think it's a template in that respect. But of course, as you alluded to, if the United States were to walk away from this agreement, the one way or the other, there are different ways of doing it. Then, of course, the arguments that might be advanced by someone in Pyongyang to the supreme leader there, Kim Jong-un, say we should negotiate with Americans. That argument risks having no credibility whatsoever. So in that sense, what happens now with Iran has fairly significant implications for the perhaps remote possibilities of a diplomatic solution of the North Korean crisis, which is far, far worse, which is a real crisis, by the way.
Understood. Handel Nadiri in Tehran, briefly, because we're heading towards the end of the programme. This is perhaps, can I suggest to you, a perfect storm of a story for Mr. Rouhani, because he gets to play to a domestic issue, a domestic audience, and also an international audience at precisely the same time.
Well, that's a good point you just mentioned. I attended the parade yesterday, which marks the anniversary of the Iraqi war on Iran in the 1980s. The only person who spoke in that parade was President Rouhani, and he spoke what he had agreed with military commanders who were standing, by the way, beside him, that he is going to continue to Iran's foreign policy in the region pace. At the same time, he is going to support Iran's decision to improve its defense capabilities. I think President Rouhani has come to the conclusion that if he wants to stay in power, he has no choice but to stick to the establishment and at the same time, you know, keep his supporters happy. But at the end of the day, every politician gives a lot of promises that at the end of the day, it is unable to deliver. President Rouhani has not been an exception. He won the votes because he made promises, but as far as his domestic policies are concerned, he hasn't delivered on his promises yet. OK, Mr.
Nadiri, thank you for that. Final brief point to both Carl Bildt and Mark Fitzpatrick. Carl Bildt, is there a sense in which Donald Trump has brought this on himself? He's taking a situation and it's turning into a crisis.
I think in this particular, I mean, you can't blame him for the North Korean crisis because that's been there for a long time and primarily caused by what the North Koreans are doing. You can have your views on the rhetoric and the methods, but that's a separate thing. Here, I think he's taken a situation where he dislikes the Iran agreement, he dislikes the Iran regime, I can understand that to some extent, and here he provokes a crisis that, in my opinion, is unnecessary. There are enough of problems in the Middle East to deal with.
Mark Fitzpatrick, we are promoting a crisis. In your mind, where do you think it's going to end up?
I'm sorry to say that although we don't have a crisis today, I think we will have a crisis in the months to come. I think probably President Trump will not certify that Iran is in compliance, even though clearly it is. He'll do that on national security grounds, which are a valid legal reason. Then it's up to the U.S. Congress whether to reimpose sanctions. It will have a fast-track legislative ability to do so, and I believe it probably will impose some previous sanctions. Some of these will be secondary sanctions, which will cause European firms to be more reluctant to enter into trade agreements and investments in Iran. Iran will have reduced benefits from the JCPOA, the Iran deal, and Iran might eventually decide that it is not in its interest to continue, or it will want to up the ante and try to provoke or threaten the United States by resuming nuclear enrichment R&D, research and development at a higher level or something else. So I think the crisis is going to be unfolding in stages over the past few months. Maybe we have to talk about that again on your show.
I'm sure we will. Gentlemen, the clock has beaten us as ever on Inside Story. Thank you so much for your company today. Thanks to all our guests, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Carl Bildt, and Barnaderi, Mark Fitzpatrick. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again whenever you want on the website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet me. I'll tweet you back. I'm at PeterDobbie1. Join the conversation on Twitter. From me, Peter Dobbie, and the team here in Doha, thank you for your company. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.